My name is Julian Birkinshaw. I'm a professor at London Business School, and I'm here to introduce Managing the Company of the Future. In this opening segment, I'm just going to give you an overview of the core ideas in this course. The first core idea is that the business world is changing. It's changing in fundamental ways and in ways that are going to require us to adapt significantly. There are four major drivers of change. The first is what we can call Web 2.0. We all know that the technology is changing the workplace. We all know that the internet and mobile telephony are making it possible to share information in ways that were not possible even a decade ago. Web 2.0 refers specifically to the organic version of the internet, whereby you and I will comment on articles, we will share our ideas. We won't just look at web pages, we will actually share and create content as well as perusing content. That is what we mean by Web 2.0, and that is really a fundamental change that's affecting the business world. The second driver is what I'm going to call Generation Y, sometimes called the millennial generation. And Generation Y are people born after the year 1980 who are now often in positions of some seniority in the workplace. And these are people who are not just tech savvy, but they're also bringing with them a different set of values than perhaps the previous generation, Generation X, or the baby boomer generation before them had when they entered the workplace. They have an expectation, for example, that they will hop jobs. They will not stay with one company for their entire career. They have expectations that the work they're doing is going to be valuable, that the companies that they work for will have some sort of higher order purpose. And so, of course, their expectations, their demands, are causing organizations to think differently about how they work. The third major driver is the emerging economies of the world. The West, if you like, Europe and North America, has been dominant, for the last 100 years. But the Chinas and the Indias of this world, of course, very, very influential countries a millennium ago, but they've been in a bit of abeyance. And now what we're seeing is enormously successful Chinese, Indian companies, and of course companies from Russia and Brazil and so forth, starting to become much more visible and present on the world stage, often coming to the world of business with a slightly different angle and certainly with lower costs. And they are causing a lot of traditional companies to have to reevaluate the way they're working. And then the final driver is sustainability, the whole agenda around creating organizations which don't just take care of the needs of a narrow set of stakeholders, but they take care of the needs of society, the communities in which they work, the future generations of employees who will come after them. Put these four sets of drivers together, and in the middle you end up with a set of new strategic imperatives. And there's lots of ways of talking about this, but let me just list four of them. Companies today say we need to become more agile. They say we need to become more innovative, both ways of adapting more quickly to the changing world. They're saying that they need to think about ways of making their employees more engaged, and they need to take purpose much more seriously. And together this gives you a framework, if you like, for thinking about the big drivers for change in the world and the imperatives, the strategic imperatives that companies are trying to address. If that's the first set of arguments about the way that the world is changing, we now have to switch to the, shall we say, the model of organizing and managing that companies are working with today. And here we have a fascinating point to make, which is that the model of organizing today is actually not very different to the model that we had almost a century ago. I will explore this in more detail in a later segment, but for the moment it's worth just acknowledging the basic assumptions or basic principles on which today's management model works. And I'm going to suggest there are four of them. We coordinate activities through bureaucracy, through standardized rules and procedures. We make decisions through the corporate hierarchy from a top-down to a bottom basis. We motivate employees through what we might call extrinsic drivers. In other words, we pay people. We pay people to deliver on giving us results. We don't fundamentally work on their other values. And finally, we set objectives through a process of what we might call linear alignment. What does that mean? It means that we as a company will often tell our investors we're going to make the following amount of money 2 years, 5 years out. And then through a process of aligning all the different parts of the organisation, we give everybody specific targets to meet in order to meet this higher overall goal. So we work back through a process of alignment from some sort of financial objective. That model of managing, as I say, we'll go into it in a later segment, but that model of managing has been around in most part for 100 years. And the interesting thing is, despite all these changes that I've talked about a few minutes ago, this model has been a little bit inert. There's of course signs of change, but when you look at companies today, they still are using basically what we can call bureaucracy as an organising model, particularly large companies. There's a slightly different story around smaller companies, which I'll get to later. So you put those two sides together and we see this fascinating tension emerging. And on the one side, we can see that that tension is being resolved in the following way. People are arguing that we are on the cusp of a revolution, a newer way of working, a brave new world, whereby the future of work actually looks dramatically different. And lots of people have argued that technology in particular is going to fundamentally transform the workplace. On the other side, we have the kind of the contrarian view that says, look, management as a way of working hasn't changed because it's not going to change. In some ways, you can argue that human nature hasn't changed, so why would we expect management to change? There's a sort of a nothing new under the sun school of thought that says, look, management is not going to evolve. And if you put those two contrary points of view together, you can see there is a fundamental tension there. There is a force, if you like, for stasis on the left-hand side, and there is a force for change on the right-hand side. These forces are both present, and the way that these forces resolve themselves is, in fact, the kind of the most fascinating thing of all about thinking about the workplace of the future. So that is the tension that is going to be at the heart of this course, the one that we're going to be discussing as we go through the various different segments and modules. So that is my overview of the course. It's called Managing the Company of the Future, and those three words are all important. Managing because we're really focusing for the most part on what managing means, how it works, what are the principles underlying our existing and our future models of managing. Secondly, the company of the future. Well, company is obviously a construction, if you like, a way of organising that, again, has got very, very kind of strong traditions. I'm not saying for a second that we will all work in companies in the future. Many of us will act as freelancers. Some of us will work in small companies. Some of us will work in companies which are governed in very, very different ways to the traditional way. But the point is that the company as a construct is something that we have to actually kind of think about and really work out what the alternative versions in the future will look like. And then finally, the future is the third theme of the course. We're going to get very much into the details of what the future of the workplace looks like in terms of the drivers for change, the drivers for success, and how we can actually rethink the way that we work to steer ourselves towards succeeding against those drivers. So that's the overview of the course, and we will now get into the detail as we progress.